La Nina conditions are coming back as we transition into fall over the course of the next couple of weeks. So let's take a look at the big picture this morning and break down the details for you. We've got this dominating ridge of high pressure that's been pretty much locked over the south central states, producing some very hot temperatures, but it's been anything but hot across a good part of the Ohio Valley, much of the Tennessee Valley, into the mid-Atlantic, and portions of the Northeast. We've got lower pressures, trough, northwest flow, and keeping the unsettled conditions alive for them. And you can actually see another pocket of cooler air off into the Pacific Northwest. That's going to be the predominant flow, and that also looks to continue. It's appearing that we're locked into an omega blocking pattern right now, where we've got this just ridge just continues to remain locked over a good part of the central US and just likely expands all the way up into Canada. But then we've got this trough that's coming in off the Pacific Northwest, and then of course the more unsettled light conditions bringing even some severe storms, some damaging winds, and some heavier rains, as well as lower pressures with that northwest flow, and continue to remain very active across a good part of the Ohio Valley and into the mid-Atlantic. But here is the latest update from the Climate Prediction Center. Does in fact, we are still in that ENSO neutral, but all indications is we're going to be transferring into a La Nina as we head into the fall months. And you can see depicted on this gray area, that is your neutral line. But once you get in the blue territory, that is La Nina conditions. So we are expecting the La Nina to come back, but it doesn't appear that's going to be very strong. It looks to, anywhere from a week, if not maybe peaking to a moderate La Nina sometime in the winter months, and then going back down into a week and transferring back into an ENSO neutral by the time we head into the spring of next year. And even the latest longer range CFS V2 is definitely not as bullish as it was maybe a couple of months ago. And you can see it definitely goes into that La Nina status, but more or less continues to remain on the weaker side, if not maybe borderline moderate side. But if that, nonetheless, it doesn't appear it's going to hang around nearly as long as the last one. The last one actually lasted 3 years. So it definitely doesn't appear this one's going to last anything like that one, as we did experience the one before. But let's break it down for you. So right now we do have that trough that continues to bring some unsettled weather, some lower pressures for the Great Lakes. That's bringing the cooler, if not almost fall-like conditions for a good part of that region. You can see our Ernesto is safely well offshore in the open waters of the Atlantic. It does get dangerously close to Bermuda over the next couple of days, but this backside flow will actually keep the cooler anomalies and actually bring the cooler anomalies really all the way down into Florida. So as you wake up on Saturday morning, yeah, that's not a misprint, folks. There are some areas could be looking at some 60s in Florida. That is fairly rare for August standards for them. So yes, it's going to be feeling really nice with that backside flow, compliments of our Ernesto, and just bringing that northwest flow, flow type setup, and the much cooler air coming in from the north. So if we break it down for you, over the course of the next 5 days, it continues to remain unsettled and bringing those heavier rains for a good part of the upper Great Lakes, much of the Ohio Valley, into the mid-Atlantic, as well as into portions of the Northeast. While under that ridge of high pressure, you pretty much have a lot of sinking air across the deep south. And then once you get up into the Pacific Northwest with that trough coming in, that's going to bring the unsettled weather back for them and can start continuing on the rainy side for the Pacific Northwest. So, but even as we expand the view and continue into middle of the part of next week, it continues with that more or less omega blocking pattern continue to unfold as more of a kind of a backdoor front slowly tries to drift into the central US, trying to eat away that ridge of high pressure. So it's going to be, slowly migrating lower in those temperatures a little bit, but nothing to take them down too drastically. It continues to remain 10, 15, if not almost upwards to almost 20 degrees below average at times in parts of the mid-Atlantic, while much of the central U.S. continues to remain above average. So it starts to break down, like I mentioned, but as soon as you think it starts to break down, the ridge does come back for a good part of the central U.S., but you can already see another trough coming in from the areas of Canada, and that will continue to dive in the longer range as we head towards that end of August time frame, as we continue to remain more or less unsettled across a good part of the Great Lakes and continue with that renewed cooler air for the Ohio Valley. But if you take a look out there into the Atlantic, you can see the La Niñas kicking in alive and well, all those well below average sea surface anomalies out here into the equatorial Pacific. What that typically means is, as these troughs continue to dive down, it doesn't like colder air, so you tend to have a less active subtropical jet stream. And you can definitely see this on this depiction, where you typically have a less active subtropical jet stream. So you have the southern regions go into a drier time frame as you have the polar jet lift well to the north, and you do see some buckling, and that's exactly why we're starting to see the transition into those cooler anomalies coming back for the Pacific Northwest and the unsettled weather, as the ridge of high pressure is still going to dominate over a good part of the central U.S. And then, of course, we got the trough that dives in from the Great Lakes, pushing those cooler anomalies into the Ohio Valley, much of that mid-Atlantic, and a good part of the Northeast. And if we extend it to the end of August, it starts to break down at times, but it just kind of comes back. So more or less, we're going to be in that same type of pattern that we're in now, and that looks to continue for the rest of August, with the much above average conditions continuing for the desert Southwest, much of the Central Plains and Southern Plains, with the cooler anomalies coming in for the Pacific Northwest. And then we have these troughs that come down at times, bringing the reinforcing shots of cooler air for the Great Lakes, the Mid-Atlantic, and keeping the unsettled weather conditions around too for some of the same areas that we're actually seeing it right now, so that you continue to remain on the unsettled side and the stormy side for a good part of the Ohio Valley into the Mid-Atlantic. And as we head into September, yes, we are in the heart of hurricane season. We've had 5 named storms. We are expecting a very active season, and I definitely feel once we turn the calendar to September, things are going to ignite in a big way. You typically have 60 to 80% of the season literally from August 20th to all the way to October 20th. So we're heading into the heart of hurricane season. Especially September is usually the busiest month, and you can see as we expand the view in much of the Mid-Atlantic, the Caribbean, the Gulf of Mexico, all the way up into the East Coast here, yes, it continues to remain very wet. So you typically have a lot of upward rising motion air, but for right now, Ernesto is the only game in town, and it looks to appear to be fairly quiet for this week of August and next week of August. So really a good part of the end of August continues to remain on the lighter side. But I do think once we transfer into September, yes, things are going to be igniting in a big way as we finally dip into that La Nina status. We typically have a lot less shear. We have a lot less African dust coming off the Sahara. So there's a lot of dynamics that are starting to come together, and we have a lot more upward rising motion air. You can see a lot of the sinking air depicted on the red here. That's why Ernesto is really the only game in town. We've got a lot of sinking air really activated over a good part of the Atlantic. But look, once we flip the calendar to September, we start to see a lot more blues start to show up in the map into the Caribbean, into the main development region. And it only continues to look to remain even more bullish the deeper we get into September. So I do feel things are going to be lighting up quickly on the hurricane front, but it's going to continue to remain on the cooler side. So the omega blocking pattern that we're in now, comes back, and it looks to come back in even into the first couple of weeks of September as we transfer into meteorologically fall. So it continues to have the more active polar jet continue to remain the cooler anomalies for the Pacific Northwest, the ridging, diving still over a good part of the Southwest, the South Central states, and I think we'll have a continued troughing inversions for a good part of the Great Lakes, much of the Ohio and Tennessee Valley, and I think for a good part of the Southeast and the East Coast will likely be below average, because I do feel it's going to be active on the Southeast as far as, hurricanes getting closer to that area continues to remain unsettled. And so I do feel that, second week of September, even the third week of September would likely continue to remain on the cooler than average side, as much of the ridging will continue to be over a good part of the central US as well. And if you look at the overall precipitation anomalies, yes, it kind of depicts that bullseye for a good part of the Southeast, but especially the East Coast. That seems to be the favored area as we head into the month of September for Atlantic hurricane season, for storms getting a little bit closer along that region. So it definitely appears not only do you remain on the cooler side with all the troughs and the lower pressures and much of the cloud cover and the rain around, but it definitely appears to be you're going to be, in kind of high alert all month long for pending tropical systems heading your way. So guys, I appreciate you guys watching. Do like this video, definitely hit the subscribe button, and catch me next update, why I protect you before and after the storm.